Uncle Ron and stuff. Another episode. Today is the 12th of January, 2024. Crossed under another year. And I'm still here. Another exciting episode. Today, I have a disclaimer in all my videos, but I will disclaim again. Sometimes I just talk out loud, and that's what I'm doing today, talking out loud. I haven't pre-thought. I haven't gone in any big analysis myself. I'm just talking out loud. So, I found years ago, because I used to do a lot of computer programming, people would come to me and they'd say, well, my code's not working. Can you take a look at it? And I'd say, yeah. What is it supposed to do? And they would start talking about what it was supposed to do. And I'd say, well, where? And they'd say, and then they'd say, oh, I know what's wrong with it. Just talking out loud helped crystallize thinking, and that's what I'm trying to do here. Anyway, today's episode is a hummy dingy. I've been predestination, random, and Monte Carlo. Okay, predestination. I grew up Presbyterian, and I want to attribute it to that, but I think there used to be the Reverend minister. There was like two of them, an old guy and a younger guy, younger being 50 maybe, older guy being in the 80s or something like that. Anyway, I think the Catholics call it what they anyway when the priest gets up and different podium and he talks about a specific item, usually tied to the readings of the day out of the Bible and so on. But anyway, Presbyterian, long time ago, the one priest that was young, the minister was 50 years or so. He was he usually had very intellectual sort of discussions when discussions monologues, and he would delve deeply into something or other. And I think by and large he left a good portion of the audience. They couldn't track it, but anyway, I think when I was in college, I wound up going with my parents again, and I really found it enlightening. The guy, I did a really good job, and I can't remember exactly what he covered, but I suspect the whole thing about uh, predetermined or predestination was one of his topics somewhere, and that's where I came up with it. And the whole concept is, well, your life is predetermined. What happens to you in your life has been set. And that's the whole issue of free will. Do you have free will or not? And I always subscribe to free will, but because you make decisions all the time, and you say, well, but maybe you're just an actor, going to there's somebody playing puppet. You're a hand puppet. You're a puppet of somebody that or some modules in a giant artificial intelligence machine, which brings me sideways to Monte Carlo. And in computer programming, it was they called Monte Carlo simulations, and you define the parameters of a particular situation. Say you introduce a new fish species to a pond, okay, and you want to know what's going to happen 50 generations from now or 100 generations, and take into account all kinds of things, the predatory nature of the other fish, the food supply, how the new fish, all these parameters, the weather, introduction of chemicals, hundreds of parameters. You put those in, and you give each one of them a reasonable uh, theoretical minimum, which is I tripped into that reading a book on Feynman. Feynman, yeah, Feynman. Theoretical minimum. Um, and what the maximum could be. For each parameter, you got this range that's reasonable. You know, each parameter has a range, hundreds of parameters, and they interact in a certain way that you define all that. Okay, and then you start the program and you let it loop. Each time it does a loop, it has results, which comes out. You know, however you wanted to determine it. What's the probability of success for this particular species? Or the impacts on other species of the introduction for this species, whatever the objective of the what we are trying to predict or look at, it records that. And then it does the loop again, and it varies the parameters. Does a loop again, varies the parameters randomly. Another coming into random now, but varies the parameters in a random sort of way, runs a loop again, runs a grid change, so that you run it 1,000 times, 10,000 times. It was interesting. Betting on football and so on has got to be a big deal all of a sudden. And so now they're running Monte Carlo simulations on a game where they do exactly what I say was, here's the team and uh, the players, their rankings and somehow or another, and the defenses, and I don't know all they put into it, but they have parameters, ranges, theoretical minimums and maximums, if you will, for every parameter, and they let it go through Monte Carlo simulation where it comes up with a result, saves it, does a simulation again, the parameters have been varied, runs it again and again and again, and then apparently they're now doing 10,000 iterations on a particular football game. And I thought it was interesting that Vegas, their odds, at the end, they're working out odds. They came up and say, well, there's 51% chance that this team will win and only 49% of the other. Well, that didn't tell me very much. They're pretty evenly matched. I mean, you're going to make a bet on 51% versus 49%. Anyway, I thought it was interesting. The idea is that you do simulations over and over again where you vary the parameters in a reasonable field range randomly each time it does a loop. Okay, back to predestination to predetermined. Or is it all, your whole life's already been defined as soon as the second you were born? In some sense it has, because your skin color and location, you'd be different if you were born in Botswana, or either white or black in Botswana, or rich or poor, or college PhD parents, or a lot of it is predefined in that sense. You get what you get when you become conscious as a human being. Some of it has been predefined already. Like my chances when I was 10 years old of ever getting into Harvard was probably 0.0001, and it didn't improve any over a period of time. You had to have been literally born into a certain uh, special situation, either have genius intelligence, which some people do, even though everything else is not suggestive of admission to Harvard. You don't have rich parents, you don't have whatever. Some of it is predefined for sure, but the issue that I'm fumbling around with has to do with randomness, random, and I've been doing a sort of a study. I was trying to see if I could get some bigger understanding of random events, random occurrences, random stuff that happens all the time. I was having to think like I'm walking by a door, the door's open, and all of a sudden I catch my belt on the handle. A totally random event has no real meaning. It's just an example of a random event. The probability in advance, if I tried to do a Monte Carlo simulation and me walking at a certain speed and belt too tight, belt too loose, blah, 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 it would come out would be the probability of it happening would be astronomically small. It's not going to happen. Yeah, but it does. Randomness in everyday life is are you predefined and have some freedom to arrange that in some sense, yeah, 'cause you're a woman. Been a long time getting women to have much more range of things they could be or want to be or should be. It's taken a long time. It was predefined. If you were born a woman in the 1800s, it was really predefined as to what predestination of what your life was going to be like. In general, I'm not. It doesn't cover 99.99999% of the cases, of course, but I'm trying to random. Certain things are not. You're burning that. But then you grow up and random events occur. I was thinking now and then it's like genetics. I'm rambling. I told you. I'm just not. I'm thinking out loud. Darwin, theory of evolution, the survival of the strongest of the species, or what really is one of the species that is more adaptive, can adapt, and that they survive and their genetics then get carried on into their offspring, and that then helps the succeeding generations survive. And again, that genetics get carried on because somewhere along the line they got adaptive. They could adapt somehow to their environment. And it's surprising to me that genetics can, in fact, change in one generation in a small incremental way, in some random small incremental way. But I think Darwin was saying, that strictly having to do with the strongest and most adaptable. And I want to throw a random element into it, and that is, I personally think we are constantly bathed in radiation from galactic sources and intergalactic sources. High energy cosmic rays, particles. The sun is bathing us in stuff all the time. I'm thinking periodically that species get hit with a, like, if you worked on a nuclear power plant around nuclear engineering or radioactivity, you're going to get whacked. It's going to go right through you, and it can definitely modify genetics. That's been proven. Um, some of the pregnant women at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, after the bomb went off, and what a year later, their children were born with various deformities, or because of genetic material had been disrupted or changed by radiation. Now I'm saying, and everything on the earth has been bathed in radiation of some kind or another all the time. 99.9% of the time, it goes right through and doesn't hit anything of real consequence. But now and then it does, and it changes the genetics. I have a problem accepting that the fact that a species learned how to, um, I don't know, a crude example, pick up a rock and throw it. I don't, that sort of thing. Yeah, in a sense, it made him he or she could be defend herself or perhaps get game, which added to the survivability of her or him, and then that added, that downstream. Okay, but I'm also saying that they're out there foraging around in the Serengeti or whatever they are, and they're being bathed by this radiation and zap, like a lightning strike. A lightning strike. You know, 1, 2, 20 get zapped. Genetic material gets modified and changed. The next generation carries that modification. Sometimes it's successful, most times it is not. And that has to do with random. I don't know if you take and look at random number sequences, which I have been doing, and you have to have a goal or an agenda if you just want to look at random numbers. It's like Well, the random, man, there's no patterns here. That's the point of being random. There's no patterns, there's no repeating this or anything. Pick some kind of objective. I'm only interested when the numbers add up to this range, certain range. When, how often does that happen? I mean, even in random numbers, you can decide that there was winners and losers. If you ran, I'm going to look at a 60 number sequence and I'm going to let it go randomly. 60 different digits, and they're going to randomly change. And I'm going to look at them and see if there's any sort of uh, results that fall into the category that I have predestined to be a value. Now you say, well, random, if it's purely, truly random, then the chances of anything you define as of interest is not going to happen very often, and that is certainly true. The point being with random is that most times it's a null. The answer is null, nothing. No matter how you define an objective, um, the random number adds up to pi. The chance, you can run a simulation, run random numbers, 60 digits or 5,000 digits, or how many digits there are in genetic material, and let the random generator run and see did any of them change anything in such a way as to enhance the survival of the species. Now, there's all kind of rules about genetics, and there's all kind of rules about everything. Certain things just can't happen, and I understand that. But in a Monte Carlo simulation where you're running something trillion times, and again, there's a time scale involved. When we think about generations, we're talking about, a human generation is 60, 70 years old. A generation in the sky where stars is, a billion years. Our sun will last for 8, 9, 10 billion years before it goes away. So it has a life cycle to it. So, a lot of it depends on the randomness of the sun. You'd have to run a simulation trillions of times to come up with pick whatever objective you wanted to, looking at random number sequences to say that, yeah, something, this happened often enough that it should have had a impact on the subject that you're playing with the random numbers. Okay, back by predestination or predetermination. You do the same thing with humans. You try to come up with a model and you say, okay, you can put big factors in like education, race, location, uh, uh, genetics of your health, genetics of this or that, the parents. You put all these things in there and you let the random number generator go. And you can scale it down. You got up this morning and you walked out in the sun and zap. You got hit by a lightning strike. A cosmic ray went right through your brain and it whacked a piece of material. Um, and a subtle change. You didn't notice it at the time, but a sequence of events controlled by laws of neural physiology and everything else gets set into motion. Okay, a lightning strike. Looking at random numbers, by and large, they're null. They do never, trillions of times it's going to come up. It doesn't do something that fits the criteria that you could say there was some meaningful result that it would have impacted the mechanism by which it was a part of. Let's put it that way. Okay. Um, in daily living, I hook my belt on the door handle. It has little or no consequence, except when it does happen, it makes me ponder. It's like, if you, 1,000 years from now, or 1,000 years in the past, you say, fictitious character Ron in the year 2024 is going to hook his belt onto a door handle as he walks by. That's like random number, 10,000 digit random number, and you run it a trillion, quadrillion times, and it never comes up. The chances of it are so minusculely small. It's like, on the other hand, things aren't just purely random. I mean, you gotta accept that in your life. It's not purely random. On the other hand, there are random events. People do get hit by lightning. You find someone, a mentor that helps you. You don't know the reason why, but he did, and it's like, or was that predefined or predestined, or is it just simply a random event, and like cue balls bouncing off of each other? Uh, Monte Carlo. I don't. I think I'm trying to play with random and try to grok random. Is it have any meaning and daily life? And I was wondering if there was any way if we could understand them random, some attribute, could we use it some way to change outcomes? And I think that's probably what I'm really headed to is trying to figure out a tool, some tool by which I include in my thinking randomness, random, something that doesn't normally fit into a everyday living scenario equation. I've been watching the show Julia Childs, and I was thinking about she's adding stuff ingredients to various cooking things, and it's not random. It's she made some decision, but she'll pull some rabbits out of her hat and puts this in there and puts that in there, and it's from one view it's sort of random. I didn't. She'd been cooking for 1,000 years and never thought about one time adding sage to this particular recipe, but she did all of a sudden, random. She got a lightning strike. She got hit, zapped by a cosmic ray. The 10,000 digit random number came up and it hit the right range of to kick in the mechanism that sparked inside of her neural network a bong, bong, and sage got added. I'm just wondering if there's some way we take into account randomness or contemplate random, that things are random, that you could change the situation. Like a good example I always use is sometimes, it's not all very often, sometimes I'm in the grocery store and you'll see a mother and she'll have like 3 kids with her and they're, these are little kids and they're misbehaving, they're taking stuff off the shelves and putting it in the carts and they're wandering down the aisle away from the mama, and it's a terrible, frustrating situation for the poor woman. And she'll eventually get to the point where she starts raising her voice, and getting upset and frustrated and all those sorts of things. And I have seen it where it goes to the point where she'll start whacking one of the children, and it, you can tell that it's escalating, as she's losing control. And in those situations, I introduce a random. I will push a bottle off the shelf and smash it to the floor. And that breaks that loop that she's got into, a random event. It didn't have any direct consequences on her, but it changed the whole dynamic. Use randomness to modify a situation. I was thinking about January, whatever, with the big insurrection. That was to me it was a riot, a randomness of riots. There was no coordinated, organized event. This was a random group of people who got together. It turned this way, went that way. After 2 years of rioting, which had been going on in major cities for the last 2 years, didn't find that out of bounds to me that there would be a riot at the Capitol after the election. Some people would not be happy about it, just like certain people weren't happy about George Floyd being killed. And they resulted in riot and taking out their anger and whatever. I don't think it was a resurrection. the resurrection. Insurrection is as much as a riot, a random sort of event of random people, and uh, some combination fell together, and violence occurred. The Monte Carlo simulation of all of the parameters involved and everything, and it came up lightning strike, and boom, the fuse was lit, and we had some violence. Some teeny meeny amount based on the people who were there, but that's beside the point. You see what I'm trying to get with random and the predestined thing? If you never thought about predestination, you probably should. Free will. What's free will? Um, Making choices. You know, I find it really appalling that college students who signed up, took out college loans to go to college, uh, are mystified why that debt cannot be forgiven. They have to pay it back. That, this was a conscious act on their part. No one twisted their arm. This was a free choice. Now, maybe some of them weren't. Maybe parents said, you got to go to college and you're paying for it because you're not living at home anymore with us. Maybe that happened, so it was, they were stuck. Maybe that was the case, and if that's the case, I can understand. Well, why do I have to pay the debt? I didn't even want to go to stinking college to start with. But that's not the case for most of them. And then here they are thinking, well, you know, there are choices, and you make choices, and you live with the consequences of your choices. A very early, I think, human learning experience is that, isn't it? You have free will if you do. I mean, not really, because back again, you only have so many choices. Usually it's yes or no. You have, a limited number of choice set that you can pick from. Is that predestined? In a way it is, because there's a range of theoretical minimum and a theoretical maximum that you have to choose from. Okay, you're in a store and you don't have any money, and there's you need a pack of cigarettes and they're right there on the counter, and you look around and nobody's watching and the guy's busy. Choice. You're going to steal it. You're going to pick it up, put it in your pocket, and walk out. That's a choice. I mean, okay. Never occurred to me to do that. I was taught better. You didn't do that. But uh, where some people in their situation, the thousand random numbers and the parameters associated with their life, their parents, where they live, whatever, that particular random set of sequences, it churned them trillion times, and they were finally, all of a sudden, lightning struck, the number fell into place, and it resulted in the decision of steal the cigarettes. I've talked out too loud, too long on this whole situation. Randomness is interesting, I find, and if you look at nuclear physics, they try to take the randomness out of things by reason, logic, mathematics, shrinking the size of observable down. Uh, the bigger the thing, the more complex components it has. I know there was one time I was involved tangentially. They were chemical warfare. They were wanted to do a simulation to figure out the best way to set up chemical warfare treatment centers. So if you had all these soldiers coming in and they were going to be hosed off and decontaminated and so on, what was the best way, the theoretical minimum infrastructure to do that in a theoretical minimum amount of time? Didn't even know what the minimum amount of time would be. They were trying to find that out. And they were going to use a simulation to do that. Put all these parameters in there from, you know, how far from the battlefield should this decontamination unit be? How many different, is it better to have one large unit or 25 smaller units? Blah, 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 blah. The idea was to use mathematics and reason and so on to come up with a range of theoretical minimum and maximum that would help them in their decision process forward. Okay. Um, you get the Monte Carlo idea. It's just changes in the parameter values. All the parameters change from a theoretical minimum to a reasonable maximum and run it over and over and over, record all the results, and then look at the results to see if there's any sort of patterns or something emerging from that, which is a form of data mining if you're interested in computer science. Or I think a lot of what's called artificial intelligence today is doing exactly what I've said. Takes large amounts of data, plays Monte Carlos with the parameters, and comes out with a range of reasonable values, or the results comes out in a range. And that then helps some analysis, human analysis of that, or maybe program analysis. I have the same sort of concept about our mental structures, that certain parts of the brain do a lot of grunt work, but the results of the grunt work is stored in a higher level memory. And then above that, there's other levels of memory that record the results from lower level processing all the way up. And you you at the top level, if you want to call it that, is specialized set aside memory for the all sorts of results that were below. If you do this, this happened, and it got stored. And then if you do all these things, next level up. So you get to the point where you have an understanding of something in a wider dimension than you have down to lower level. Anyway, I already talked about that, thoughts on thoughts. Now I'm talking about predestination. Is everything predefined? I don't think it is. There are certain things are for sure when you get started as a human being. In fact, you weren't born a dog, you weren't born a chicken, something like that. You're lucky enough to be in a human species with all of the attributes that humans seem to have, like being able to think or talk or dialogue or experiment. Anyway, enough of this. This is way too long. I apologize. I always do, but I'm just talking out loud. And I think as I talked, I got gleaned some things out of it that I was trying to formulate in my mind, but it wasn't working that way. So vocalizing it helped. Anyway, Uncle Ron's stuff. This was predestination, Monte Carlo, like gambling. You spin the roulette wheel, and a number comes up. You bet on a number or bet on a color, or randomness, random numbers, and possible possible consequences of sequences of random numbers. It's 11th of yep, the 12th of January, 2024. Happy New Year, and Uncle Ron is done on this one. Thank God, right?